The stagecoach lurched violently to one side, throwing Sarah Graham against the hard wooden interior as gunshots cracked through the afternoon air like thunder over the New Mexico desert. The year was 1878, and she had been traveling for 3 weeks from Philadelphia to reach her late aunt's homestead near White Oaks, carrying nothing but 2 trunks of belongings and a deed that proved her inheritance. She had never expected the journey to end with masked men surrounding the coach, their revolvers gleaming in the harsh sunlight that beat down on the dusty trail. "Everyone out," a gruff voice commanded from outside, and Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered her skirts. The other 2 passengers, an elderly couple from Santa Fe, clutched each other in terror. The driver had already climbed down, his hands raised high above his head. Sarah stepped out into the blinding light, her boots touching the red dirt of the trail. 3 men on horseback circled the stagecoach, their faces covered with bandanas, their eyes hard and calculating. She could smell the sweat of their horses mixed with gunsmoke and dust. "Well, well," the leader said, his gaze settling on Sarah. "Pretty thing, aren't you? Hand over your valuables, all of you, and maybe we'll let you keep breathing." The elderly man fumbled with his pocket watch, passing it over with shaking hands. His wife removed her wedding ring, tears streaming down her weathered face. Sarah's throat tightened as she realized she had her mother's locket around her neck, the only piece of jewelry she owned that held any value beyond sentiment. "I said hand it over." The leader's voice rose impatiently, and he dismounted, stalking toward Sarah with heavy steps that kicked up small clouds of dust. Before Sarah could move, a rifle shot rang out from the rocky hillside to the east. The bullet struck the ground directly between the outlaw's boots, stopping him in his tracks. Everyone's heads snapped toward the source of the shot. A man stood on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the sky like some avenging angel carved from granite and determination. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the breadth of his shoulders, the powerful build that spoke of a life lived in these unforgiving mountains. He held a rifle with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. "That's close enough," the man called down, his voice carrying across the canyon with natural authority. "Drop your weapons and ride out, or the next shot won't be a warning." The 3 outlaws exchanged glances, and Sarah saw the calculation in their eyes. 3 against 1. They liked those odds, even with the stranger holding the high ground. "You picked the wrong fight, mountain man," the leader shouted back. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you." "I've faced worse odds over breakfast," came the reply, and Sarah detected something almost amused in the man's tone, though his stance remained ready and alert. The outlaws spread out, trying to find cover behind the stagecoach and nearby rocks. The leader grabbed Sarah's arm, yanking her against him as a human shield. She gasped at the sudden violence, feeling the cold steel of his revolver press against her ribs. "Come on down here and we'll talk about it," the outlaw called up to the ridge, "or the girl gets hurt." Sarah's heart hammered against her chest, but she forced herself to remain still. She watched as the mountain man began descending the rocky slope with surprising agility for someone of his size. As he drew closer, she could make out more details: dark hair that fell past his collar, sun-bronzed skin, and arms corded with muscle visible beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves. He moved like a predator, each step deliberate and controlled. When he reached level ground about 20 yards from the stagecoach, he stopped. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains. They swept across the scene, taking in everything with a single glance before settling on the man holding Sarah. "Let her go," he said simply. It wasn't a request. "Drop the rifle first," the outlaw demanded, tightening his grip on Sarah's arm until she couldn't suppress a small cry of pain. The mountain man's jaw clenched, but he slowly lowered the rifle and set it on the ground. Then he straightened, spreading his hands slightly to show he was unarmed, though Sarah noticed he still had a knife sheathed at his belt and a revolver holstered at his hip. "Now the rest," the outlaw said. "No." The single word held absolute finality. The outlaw cursed and shoved Sarah away, bringing his gun up to aim at the mountain man. But before he could pull the trigger, the stranger moved with startling speed. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, his hand clamping down on the outlaw's wrist and twisting with brutal efficiency. The gun fired harmlessly into the air as the man's arm was forced up, and then the mountain man's fist connected with his jaw in a devastating blow that sent him sprawling into the dirt. The other two outlaws rushed forward, abandoning their cover. Sarah scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stagecoach as she watched the fight unfold. The mountain man moved like nothing she had ever seen, all controlled power and precise violence. He blocked a punch from the second outlaw, grabbed the man's arm, and used his own momentum to flip him over his hip. The man hit the ground hard, the air whooshing from his lungs. The third outlaw managed to land a blow to the mountain man's ribs, but if it hurt him, he didn't show it. He pivoted, his elbow driving back into the man's face with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed from the outlaw's broken nose, and he staggered backward, hands flying to his face. The leader had recovered and came at the mountain man from behind, but the stranger seemed to sense him coming. He ducked under a wild swing, rose up inside the man's guard, and delivered a series of quick, powerful strikes to his midsection that folded him in half. A final uppercut sent the leader sprawling unconscious into the dust. The second outlaw was struggling to his feet, gasping for air. He took one look at his two companions on the ground, and the mountain man standing over them, barely winded, and made a decision. He ran for the horses, scrambling into the saddle and spurring his mount into a gallop without looking back. The third man, blood still pouring from his nose, followed suit. They left their leader behind, unconscious in the dirt. Silence fell over the scene, broken only by the nervous shuffling of the stagecoach horses and the elderly woman's quiet sobs of relief. The mountain man walked over to where the leader lay, checked to make sure he was truly unconscious, and retrieved the man's weapons. Then he collected his rifle and turned to face the passengers. Sarah found herself unable to look away from him. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had first thought. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a frame built of solid muscle, earned through hard work and harder living. His face was rugged and weathered, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that held her attention, those storm-gray eyes that now swept over her with concern. "Anyone hurt?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Sarah's chest. "No, sir," the elderly man replied, his voice still shaking. "Thanks to you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." The mountain man nodded once, dismissing the gratitude as though it was unnecessary. He walked over to Sarah, who was still pressed against the stagecoach, her legs trembling beneath her skirts. "You all right, miss?" he asked, and she noticed his eyes had softened slightly, some of the hard edge fading as he looked at her. "Yes," she managed, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, thank you. That was... You fought all 3 of them alone." 2.5, he corrected with the faintest hint of a smile. "One of them ran before I finished." Sarah felt a nervous laugh bubble up in her throat, released partly from shock and partly from the absurdity of the situation. This man had just saved her life, fought off 3 armed outlaws with his bare hands, and now he was making jokes about it. I'm Zachary Cooper," he said, offering his hand. "Most folks call me Zach. I have a cabin about 2 miles north of here, up in the mountains." Sarah took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "Sarah Graham. I'm traveling to White Oaks. My aunt left me property there." "White Oaks is still a good day's ride from here," Zach said, frowning slightly. He glanced at the driver, who was checking the horses. "You planning to keep going today?" The driver shook his head emphatically. "Not a chance. Those outlaws might come back with friends, and I'm not risking it. We'll camp here tonight and move on at first light with any luck." "Yes." Zach's frown deepened. He looked at the unconscious outlaw, then back at the rocky terrain surrounding them. "This isn't a good place to camp. Too exposed, and you're right about them possibly coming back." He seemed to consider something for a moment, then made a decision. "My cabin's not far. You can all spend the night there. It's defensible, and I've got supplies." "We couldn't impose," the elderly woman said, though hope flickered in her eyes. "It's not an imposition," Zach replied. "It's common sense. Besides, I'll sleep better knowing you're all safe rather than sitting out here like targets." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. There was something deeply reassuring about Zachary Cooper, something that went beyond his obvious physical capability. He cared about their safety in a way that seemed genuine and unpretentious. "We'll need to secure this one," Zach said, gesturing to the still unconscious outlaw leader. "Driver, you got rope?" Together, Zach and the driver bound the outlaw's hands and feet, then loaded him onto the back of the stagecoach. "We'll turn him over to the law in White Oaks," Zach explained. "He'll face justice for what he tried to do today." The journey to Zach's cabin took about an hour, following a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills of the mountains. The landscape was stark and beautiful, all red rock and scrub pine, with the peaks rising dramatically in the distance. Sarah found herself watching Zach as he rode ahead of the stagecoach on his own horse, a sturdy roan that seemed as sure-footed as its master. He sat in the saddle with natural ease, scanning the terrain constantly, always alert. When they finally reached the cabin, Sarah was surprised by what she found. She had expected something rough and primitive, but while the structure was simple, it was well built and maintained. The cabin sat in a small valley with a creek running nearby, surrounded by tall pines that provided shade and shelter. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting Zach had left a fire burning before he'd set out that day. "It's not much," Zach said as he dismounted, "but it's solid. I built it myself 3 years ago." "It's lovely," Sarah said honestly, taking in the covered porch, the sturdy door, the neat stack of firewood along one wall. Zach helped the elderly couple down from the stagecoach first, then turned to Sarah. His hands circled her waist as he lifted her down, and she was acutely aware of his strength, the way he made the task seem effortless. Her boots touched the ground, but his hands lingered for just a moment before he released her. "I've only got one bedroom," Zach explained as he unlocked the door. "The lady can have that. The elderly gentleman and the driver can take the main room by the fire. I'll sleep outside, keep watch." "You don't have to do that," Sarah protested. "I can sleep by the fire." Zach gave her a look that was both firm and gentle. "You'll take the bedroom, miss. No arguments." Something in his tone made it clear that this wasn't up for discussion. Sarah found herself nodding, accepting his decision without further protest. There was a command in his voice that came naturally, not from arrogance but from a deep-seated certainty about how things should be done. Inside, the cabin was spare but comfortable. The main room held a table, several chairs, a stone fireplace with a good fire burning, and a couple of bunks built into one wall. A curtain separated off what Sarah assumed was the bedroom. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, books, and various tools. Everything was neat and organized, speaking to the disciplined mind of the man who lived here. "I'll make some coffee," Zach said, moving to the fireplace where a pot hung on a hook. "And I've got venison stew from yesterday. Should be enough for everyone." As he worked, Sarah found herself watching him again. He moved with efficiency in the kitchen space, clearly comfortable in his own domain. She noticed the way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt as he reached for things, the controlled grace in his movements. When he'd fought those outlaws, she'd been terrified. But there had been something else, too. She had felt safe watching him, knowing he stood between her and danger. The elderly woman, who introduced herself as Martha Henderson, along with her husband George, helped Sarah clean up at the wash basin Zach provided. The cool water felt wonderful on her dusty face, washing away some of the grime and shock of the day. "That man is a godsend," Martha whispered to Sarah as they dried their hands. "I've never seen anyone fight like that. So controlled, so powerful, and yet he's been nothing but gentle with us." Sarah nodded, unable to disagree. There was something remarkable about Zachary Cooper, something that went beyond his physical prowess. Dinner was a quiet affair. The stew was hearty and well-seasoned, the coffee strong and bitter in the way that tasted perfect after a long, difficult day. Zach ate efficiently, still alert, his attention constantly drifting to the door and windows as though expecting trouble. "How long have you lived up here?" George asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 3 years, Zach replied. "After the war, I didn't much feel like being around people anymore. Came west, found this valley, and decided it was far enough from everything." "You fought in the war?" Sarah asked softly. Zach's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I did. Confederate Army, though I didn't own slaves and didn't believe in the cause. But Tennessee was my home, and when they called, I went. Spent 4 years seeing things no man should see, doing things no man should have to do." He paused, staring into his coffee cup. "When it was over, I just wanted peace and quiet. Found it here." Sarah heard the pain in his voice, the weight of memories he carried. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer some comfort, but she didn't know how. They had only just met after all, even if he had saved her life. "What brings you to White Oaks, Miss Graham?" Zach asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. My aunt passed away 6 months ago, Sarah explained. She never married, had no children. She left me her property, a small ranch on the outskirts of town. I've been traveling from Philadelphia to claim it. You come all this way alone? There was concern in Zach's voice. I hired an escort as far as Santa Fe, Sarah said. From there, the stagecoach was supposed to be safe enough. Obviously, that didn't work out as planned. White Oaks has grown rough, Zach said. Mining boom brought in all kinds. Good people mostly, but bad elements too. Your aunt's place, it's isolated? According to her letters, yes, about 5 miles outside of town, near the base of the mountains. Zach frowned. That's not safe for a woman alone. You have any experience running a ranch? Sarah bristled slightly at the implication. I'm not helpless, Mr. Cooper. I can learn. I don't doubt you can learn, Zach said calmly. But there's a difference between learning and surviving while you learn. Men around here, some of them won't respect a woman on her own. They'll see easy pickings, a chance to take what isn't theirs. His words sent a chill through Sarah because she knew he was right. She had been so focused on reaching the property, on claiming her inheritance and starting a new life, that she hadn't fully considered the practical realities of what that life would entail. What would you suggest? She asked, swallowing her pride. This man had already saved her life once today. Perhaps it would be wise to listen to his counsel. Zach considered her question seriously. You'll need help. Ranch hands you can trust or a manager who knows the land. And you'll need to establish yourself in town, let people know you're not to be trifled with. It might help to have someone vouch for you, someone the rougher elements respect. Someone like you? The words were out before Sarah could think better of them. Zach's gray eyes met hers across the table, and something passed between them, some unspoken acknowledgement of a connection neither of them had expected. I don't go into town much, he said slowly. But for something like this, I could make an exception. I could ride in with you tomorrow, help you get settled. I couldn't ask you to do that, Sarah said, though part of her desperately wanted to accept his offer. You didn't ask. I'm offering. Zach's tone was firm again, that natural command returning. Those outlaws today, they weren't random. They're probably part of a larger gang working this area. You need someone watching your back until you're established. Sarah felt something flutter in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but something more. She barely knew this man, yet she trusted him completely. He had fought for her, risked himself for strangers, and now he was offering to help her again, asking nothing in return. Then I accept, she said quietly. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Zach, he corrected. If I'm going to be helping you get settled, we might as well use first names. Zach, Sarah repeated, liking the way it felt to say his name. And please call me Sarah. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, almost boyish despite his obvious maturity and the experiences that had weathered him. As the evening wore on, Martha and George retired to the bunks in the main room, exhausted from the day's events. The driver, a man named Bill who had said little all evening, settled near the fireplace. Zach showed Sarah to the bedroom, carrying her trunk for her despite her protests. I really can manage, she said as he set it down at the foot of the bed. I know you can, Zach replied. But you don't have to. Not tonight, anyway. The bedroom was simple, containing just the bed, a small table with a lantern, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. But the bed looked comfortable, with clean blankets and a pillow that smelled faintly of pine and fresh air. You built all of this yourself? Sarah asked, running her hand over the smooth wood of the bed frame. Every board, Zach confirmed. Took me the better part of a year, working between hunting and trapping. But I wanted it done right, built to last. He paused, then added, I'll be right outside if you need anything. Don't hesitate to call out. Where will you sleep? Sarah asked. On the porch. I've got bedrolls out there. I'm used to it. Sarah wanted to protest again, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He had made up his mind, and she was beginning to understand that Zachary Cooper was not a man easily swayed once a decision was made. Good night, then, she said softly, and thank you for everything. Zach nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. Good night, Sarah. Sleep well. You're safe here. After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The day had been like nothing she could have imagined, This morning, she had been a woman traveling to claim an inheritance, nervous but hopeful about her future. Tonight she was in a mountain man's cabin, having watched him fight off 3 outlaws with his bare hands, feeling things she couldn't quite name. She had seen Zach fight, had seen the controlled violence he was capable of, and instead of being frightened of him, she felt safer than she had in years. There was something profound about that, something that spoke to an instinct deeper than rational thought. Sarah changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the blankets. They were rough but warm, and the pillow cradled her head perfectly. Through the thin walls she could hear the crackle of the fire, the quiet snores of George Henderson, and somewhere outside, the distant call of a night bird. She closed her eyes, but sleep eluded her. Her mind kept replaying the fight, kept seeing Zach's face as he'd looked at her, kept feeling the warmth of his hands at her waist as he'd lifted her from the stagecoach. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. Less than 12 hours ago, she hadn't known he existed. And yet something had shifted in her world today, some fundamental change she couldn't yet fully understand. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing that Zachary Cooper stood watch outside, keeping the darkness at bay. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. Pale morning light filtered through the single window, and for a moment, Sarah couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The outlaws, Zach, the fight. She dressed quickly in a practical traveling dress of dark blue cotton, pinned her auburn hair up in a simple style, and emerged from the bedroom. Zach stood at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same efficient movements he'd displayed the night before. He had changed his shirt and looked freshly washed, his dark hair still damp. When he heard her emerge, he turned and offered her a smile. "Morning? Coffee?" "Please," Sarah said gratefully. She accepted the cup he poured and took a sip, savoring the bitter warmth. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," Zach replied. "I don't need much." Martha was already awake, helping set out plates on the table. George and Bill were stirring from their bedrolls. The morning routine unfolded with surprising comfort, as though they had all been doing this for years rather than having just met the day before. Breakfast was hearty. Bacon, fried potatoes, biscuits that Zach produced from a Dutch oven, and more coffee. They ate mostly in silence, the early morning not yet conducive to conversation. "We should get moving soon," Bill said finally. "Want to make White Oaks by afternoon if we can." Zach nodded. "I'll ride with you. Make sure there's no more trouble on the trail." "What about the outlaw?" George asked, gesturing toward the door where the bound man had spent the night tied to a porch post. "He's awake and complaining," Zach said. "We'll take him with us, turn him over to the marshal in White Oaks. With any luck, he'll give up information on his gang." They broke camp efficiently. Zach helped Sarah load her trunk back onto the stagecoach, and she noticed the way his hands lingered again, solicitous and careful. When everything was ready, he saddled his roan and led the way down from the mountain cabin, the stagecoach following behind. The journey to White Oaks was uneventful, though Zach rode with constant vigilance, his eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of trouble. Sarah watched him through the stagecoach window, admiring the easy way he sat his horse, the alertness in every line of his body. He was a man built for this land, shaped by it, and in harmony with it in a way she had never experienced in Philadelphia. White Oaks appeared as they crested a rise around mid-afternoon. The town sprawled across a valley, a collection of wooden buildings and tents that spoke to both permanent settlement and temporary mining camps. Mountains rose on all sides, and Sarah could see the dark mouths of mine shafts dotting the hillsides. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from a distance she could hear the sounds of industry. Hammers, voices, the creak of wagon wheels. "Growing fast," Zach commented, riding alongside the stagecoach window. "Wasn't even half this size when I first came through 3 years ago." "Is that good or bad?" Sarah asked. "Depends on your perspective. Growth means opportunity, but it also means chaos. Law struggles to keep up with population. Good men and bad men both see chances here." They rode into town, drawing looks from people on the street. Zach's presence alone commanded attention, and Sarah noticed more than a few curious glances directed at her as well. He led them directly to the marshal's office, a sturdy building near the center of town with iron bars on the windows. Marshal Tom Garrett was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He stepped out onto the wooden walkway as they approached, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Zach Cooper," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Didn't expect to see you in town. What brings you down from your mountain?" "Trouble," Zach replied, dismounting. He gestured to the bound outlaw on the back of the stagecoach. "He and 2 others tried to rob this stage yesterday. I convinced them not to." Garrett's expression hardened as he looked at the outlaw. "I know this one, Jake Morrison. He's been wanted for robbery and murder up in Colorado. Figured he'd moved on to Arizona by now." He called for his deputy, and together they hauled Morrison down and into the jail. "I'll need statements from everyone." "I'll vouch for what happened," Zach said, "but first I need to help Miss Graham here. She's just arrived to claim her aunt's property." Garrett's attention shifted to Sarah as she stepped down from the stagecoach. "You'd be Martha Graham's niece then. I'm sorry for your loss. Martha was a good woman, tough as nails. Ran that ranch on her own for 20 years. "Thank you, Marshal," Sarah said. "I'm hoping to continue her work." "That property's been sitting empty for 6 months," Garrett said thoughtfully. "I've had Bill Hutchins keeping an eye on it, making sure no one tries to squat there or steal what's inside. You'll want to get out there soon, stake your claim properly." "I plan to," Sarah said. "Could you direct me to a lawyer? I have the deed, but I assume there are legal matters to finalize." "Harold Peterson's your man. Office is 2 streets over, above the general store. He handled your aunt's affairs." Garrett paused, then looked at Zach. "You helping her get settled?" "That's the plan," Zach confirmed. Something unreadable passed across Garrett's face, a mixture of surprise and approval. "Well, that's good. Real good. Miss Graham, you're in capable hands. Zach here doesn't come down from his mountain for just anyone." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication in the marshal's words. Zach's expression didn't change, but she thought she saw the faintest hint of color touch his weathered cheeks as well. After giving their statements about the robbery, which took the better part of an hour, Zach guided Sarah to the general store. "You'll need supplies," he said. "Your aunt probably had some basics at the ranch, but 6 months is a long time for things to sit unused." Inside the store, Sarah was overwhelmed by the sheer variety of goods available. Zach moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting items and creating a mental list. He consulted with her on some things, but made executive decisions on others, particularly items related to ranch work and survival that she wouldn't have known to purchase. "You don't have to pay for all of this," Sarah protested as the pile on the counter grew. "I have money from the sale of my parents' house." "I'm not paying for all of it," Zach said. "Just the immediate necessities. You can pay me back if you want, or you can consider it a welcome gift to New Mexico. Your choice." The store owner, a jovial man named Samuel Curtis, added up the purchases. "Good to see you, Zach. Been almost 6 months since you came in last." "I stock up when I come," Zach replied. "Try not to make the trip more than twice a year." "Well, you're always welcome. And Miss Graham, welcome to White Oaks. Your aunt was well respected here. I hope you'll be happy at the ranch." From the store, they went to the lawyer's office. Harold Peterson was a thin, precise man with spectacles perched on his nose. He examined Sarah's documents carefully, nodded with satisfaction, and produced papers for her to sign. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. "The property consists of 200 acres, the main house, a barn, a well, and various outbuildings. Your aunt's livestock was sold after her death, proceeds held in trust for you. That amounts to approximately $800. The property itself is fully paid for, no debts or liens." $800 was more money than Sarah had expected. Combined with what she had brought from Philadelphia, it would give her a solid foundation to rebuild the ranch. "There is one complication," Peterson continued, adjusting his spectacles. "A man named Vincent Drake has expressed interest in purchasing the property. He owns several mining operations in the area and has been consolidating land. He made your aunt an offer before her death, which she refused. He's contacted me twice since then, asking about the status of the property." "I'm not interested in selling," Sarah said firmly. "I didn't think you would be," Peterson replied. "But Drake can be persistent. He's not a man accustomed to hearing no. I wanted you to be aware of the situation." Zach, who had been standing quietly by the window, spoke up. "This Drake, he caused trouble. He operates within the law," Peterson said carefully. "Mostly. but he has men who work for him who aren't always so careful about legal niceties. I would advise Miss Graham to be cautious in her dealings with him." "She will be," Zach said, and something in his tone made it clear he wasn't just offering advice, but making a promise. They left the lawyer's office as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The supplies they'd purchased were loaded onto a wagon Zach had arranged to rent, his roan tied to the back. "We should head to the ranch while there's still good light," Zach said. "I want to see what condition the place is in before dark." The ride out of town took them along a well-worn trail that wound through scrubland and scattered pine trees. After about an hour, they turned onto a smaller path, and Sarah's breath caught as the ranch came into view. The house was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure built of wood with a wide porch across the front. The barn stood to one side, and she could see several smaller outbuildings scattered around the property. The land itself was beautiful, rolling hills that led up to the base of the mountains, with a creek running through the lower pastures. In the distance, she could see the remnants of fences that would need repair. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. Zach studied the property with a critical eye. "Your aunt knew how to pick land. Good water, natural shelter from the wind, close enough to town, but far enough for privacy. The buildings look solid from here." They drove up to the house, and Zach helped Sarah down from the wagon. Marshall Garrett had given them the key, and Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the front door. It swung open with a creak of hinges, revealing a dusty interior filled with furniture covered in white sheets. The house smelled of disuse and age, but as they pulled back the sheets, Sarah found well-made furniture, a large stone fireplace, a kitchen with a proper stove, and rooms that spoke of a life lived with care and attention to detail. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, each simply furnished but comfortable. "Your aunt lived well," Zach observed, running his hand over the solid wood of a table. "This is quality work." They spent the next hour exploring the property. The barn needed some repairs but was structurally sound. The well still produced clear, cold water. The fences would need significant work, but the posts were still solid in most places. It was a ranch that had been well maintained and only needed some attention to bring it back to full function. As darkness began to fall, Zach started a fire in the kitchen stove and lit several lanterns. They brought in the supplies from the wagon, stocking the pantry and setting up basics for Sarah to begin living there. "You'll need to hire help," Zach said as they worked. "At least 2 or 3 ranch hands to start. Someone to help repair fences, maybe work with livestock if you decide to restock. And you might want to consider hiring a woman from town, someone to help with the house and provide companionship. It's isolated out here." Sarah nodded, though the thought of filling her aunt's house with strangers felt overwhelming. "Will you help me find the right people?" "I can ask around," Zach said. "There are good men in town looking for honest work. I'll make sure you get recommendations you can trust." They prepared a simple dinner from the supplies they'd brought, working together in the kitchen with surprising ease. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of Zach's presence, the way he moved around the space, the way he occasionally glanced at her to make sure she was all right. The air between them felt charged somehow, as though something unspoken was building with each passing hour. After dinner, as they sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, Zach finally addressed what had been hanging unspoken between them all day. "I should head back to my cabin tonight," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced of his own words. "You're settled now, safe enough." "What if those outlaws come back?" Sarah asked, and she heard the note of panic in her own voice. "What if this Vincent Drake decides to cause trouble?" "The outlaws won't come here," Zach said. "They don't know where you went, and with their leader in custody, they'll likely scatter. As for Drake, he'll approach you legally first. He's too smart to do anything that would get the marshal involved unnecessarily." "But you said he has men who aren't careful about legal niceties," Sarah pointed out. Zach's jaw tightened. He was clearly wrestling with something internal, some conflict between what he thought he should do and what he wanted to do. Sarah found herself holding her breath, waiting for his decision. "I could stay," he said finally, "in the barn, just for a few days until you're properly settled and have hired help. I could start on some of the repairs, make sure no one bothers you." Relief flooded through Sarah, and she realized how much she had been hoping he would say exactly that. "I would appreciate that very much," she said quietly, "and I can pay you for the work." "I don't want your money, Sarah." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. "I want to help you because—" He trailed off, seeming uncertain how to finish the sentence. "Because why?" Sarah asked softly. Zach's gray eyes met hers across the table, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. "Because from the moment I saw you on that trail, standing up to those outlaws despite being terrified, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Because you're brave and strong, and you deserve someone watching out for you while you find your footing in this rough country. Because—" He stopped, shook his head. "Because I want to. That's reason enough." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I'm glad," she managed. "I'm glad you want to stay. I feel safe when you're near." Something shifted in Zach's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight relaxation in his shoulders. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you need me." The promise in those words felt like more than just an offer of protection. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both recognized as significant. That night, after Zach had gone out to the barn with blankets and a lantern, Sarah lay in bed in her aunt's house and stared at the ceiling. Everything had changed so quickly. 2 days ago, she had been alone in the world, traveling toward an uncertain future. Now she had property, a home, and a man who fought off outlaws to protect her sleeping in her barn. She thought about Zach's confession over coffee, the raw honesty in his voice. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, each word carried weight. He had opened up to her, shown her a glimpse of what lay beneath his controlled exterior, and what she had seen made her want to know more. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and peaceful, knowing Zachary Cooper stood watch over her property, keeping her safe through the night. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Zach already at work on the barn, replacing boards that had rotted or split. He had his shirt off in the morning heat, and Sarah found herself transfixed by the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he swung the hammer. He was built like the mountains themselves, all solid strength and enduring power. He turned when he heard her approach, and Sarah quickly looked away, feeling heat rise to her cheeks at having been caught staring. "Morning," Zach said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I figured I'd start with the barn. Some of these boards are pretty far gone." "You've already accomplished so much," Sarah said, looking at the pile of old boards he'd removed and the fresh lumber he must have brought from his own supplies. "Let me make breakfast. You shouldn't work on an empty stomach." They fell into a routine over the next several days that felt both natural and intimate. Zach worked on repairs during the day, fixing the barn, mending fences, clearing the creek of debris that had accumulated. Sarah cleaned the house thoroughly, organized her aunt's belongings, and began planning what crops she might plant and what livestock she might purchase. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together and sat on the porch, talking as the sun set over the mountains. Zach told her about his life before the war, growing up on a small farm in Tennessee, learning to hunt and track from his father. He spoke little of the war itself, but Sarah could see the shadows that crossed his face when the subject came up, the pain of memories he would rather forget. She told him about Philadelphia, about her parents who had died when she was 19, leaving her to make her own way in the world. She had worked as a seamstress for 3 years, living in a boarding house and saving every penny she could. Her aunt's letter about the ranch had come like a miracle, an opportunity to start fresh in a new place. "Were you close with your aunt?" Zach asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Not as close as I would have liked," Sarah admitted. "She left Philadelphia when I was young, seeking adventure in the West. She wrote letters, but they came only a few times a year. I always admired her courage, though. She did what most women wouldn't dare, built a life on her own terms." "You're like her," Zach observed, "coming all this way alone, ready to take on a ranch you've never seen. That takes courage, too." "I don't feel very courageous," Sarah confessed. "Most of the time I feel terrified and uncertain. I keep wondering if I've made a terrible mistake." "You haven't," Zach said with quiet certainty. "You're going to make this work. You've got the spirit for it, the determination, and you're not alone anymore." The way he said that last part made Sarah's breath catch. She looked at him in the gathering darkness, at the strong lines of his face illuminated by lamplight spilling from the house, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just gratitude anymore, wasn't just appreciation for his help. This was something deeper, something that made her pulse race and her skin feel too warm. "Zach," she said softly, and he turned to face her fully, those storm-gray eyes focused entirely on her. "What happens when the repairs are done, when the ranch is running properly and I don't need protection anymore?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Zach was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he considered his answer. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I came down from my mountain thinking I'd help you get settled and then go back to my solitary life. But now," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "now I can't imagine going back to that cabin and not seeing you every day, not hearing your voice or your laugh, not sitting here on this porch with you as the sun goes down." Sarah's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Then don't go back," she whispered. "Stay. Sarah, I'm not an easy man. I've got ghosts that wake me up at night. I'm used to being alone, to silence and solitude. I don't know if I can be what you need, if I can be the kind of man you deserve." "You saved my life," Sarah said, reaching out to touch his hand where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm and calloused beneath her fingers. "You've protected me, helped me, asked for nothing in return. You've been kind and patient and steady. That's exactly the kind of man I need." Zach turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. The contact sent electricity racing up Sarah's arm. "This is fast," he said. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," Sarah replied. "I know that when I watched you fight those 3 men alone, I wasn't afraid of you. I was in awe of you. I know that every night when I go to sleep I feel safe because you're watching over me. I know that I look forward to every evening on this porch more than anything else in my day. That's enough to build on, isn't it?" Zach's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the gesture almost unconscious. "I can't offer you an easy life. I'm not a rich man. I live off the land, do odd jobs when I need cash for supplies. I'm rough around the edges, not educated or refined like the men you must have known back east." "I don't want easy," Sarah said firmly. "I came here for a new life, for adventure and possibility. I want real and honest and true. That's what you are, Zach. You're the most genuine person I've ever met." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so tender it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Then I'll stay," he said quietly, "for as long as you'll have me. But we'll do this right. I'll court you properly, give you time to be sure. I won't rush you into anything." "I'm already sure," Sarah said, but she understood what he was offering. Time to build something solid, to let their connection deepen and grow beyond the intense circumstances of their first meeting. "But I appreciate your honor." Zach smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "My mother would roll over in her grave if I didn't court you properly. She raised me better than to rush a lady." Sarah laughed, the sound bright in the quiet evening air. "Tell me about your mother." They talked late into the night, sharing stories, learning each other's histories and dreams. When Sarah finally went inside to sleep, she felt lighter than she had in years, as though a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. Over the following weeks, Zach became a constant presence at the ranch. He still slept in the barn, maintaining propriety despite the growing connection between them. He completed the major repairs and began teaching Sarah the practical skills she would need to run the property successfully. He showed her how to maintain the fences, how to judge good grazing land, how to handle tools and equipment. He taught her to shoot, spending hours at target practice until she could hit a can at 20 paces with reasonable consistency. He was patient and thorough, never condescending or dismissive of her questions. They made several trips into White Oaks together, and Sarah began to notice how the townspeople reacted to them as a pair. There were knowing looks, approving nods from older women, speculative glances from merchants. Zach's presence at her side seemed to establish her credibility in a way nothing else could have. Marshal Garrett stopped them on one trip into town. "Miss Graham, I wanted you to know that Vincent Drake has been asking about you. Nothing threatening, just questions about when you arrived and whether you're settling in. I told him you're well established and not interested in selling." "Thank you, Marshal," Sarah said. "Has he caused any trouble?" "Not yet," Garrett replied, "but I'd keep my eyes open. Drake doesn't give up easily when he wants something. His gaze shifted to Zach. Good thing she's got you around. Drake's men won't try anything stupid if they know you're involved. That evening, as they drove the wagon back to the ranch, Sarah brought up the subject. Do you really think this Drake might cause problems? He might try, Zach said, but he'll find out quickly that you're not as vulnerable as he assumes. We'll deal with it if it comes to that. The "we" in that sentence warmed Sarah's heart. They had become a partnership, she and Zach, working together toward common goals. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, respected her opinions even as he offered his greater experience. She, in turn, had learned to trust his judgment while standing firm on the things that mattered most to her. Zach had also helped her hire 3 ranch hands: Miguel Ortiz, a skilled horseman and cowhand in his 30s, Tom Wilson, a younger man eager to learn and prove himself, and James "Old Jim" Patterson, a weathered veteran who knew everything about cattle and sheep. All 3 came with strong recommendations, and they respected both Sarah and Zach immediately. With help in place, the ranch began to truly come alive. They purchased cattle, chickens, and 2 horses. The fences were completed, the barn was repaired and restocked, and the fields were prepared for spring planting. Sarah hired a woman from town named Lucy Chen, the daughter of Chinese immigrants, to help with the house a few days each week. Lucy was efficient, kind, and quickly became a friend as well as an employee. Through it all, Zach courted Sarah with old-fashioned deliberation. He brought her wildflowers picked from the mountain meadows. He carved her a beautiful jewelry box from pine, the wood sanded smooth and polished until it gleamed. He read to her in the evenings from books he borrowed from town, his deep voice bringing stories to life. They took long walks around the property, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence. He kissed her for the first time on a Sunday afternoon 6 weeks after they'd met. They had been sitting by the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones, when Sarah had looked up at him and found him watching her with an expression so tender it stole her breath. "Sarah," he said softly, and then he was leaning in, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. His lips met hers in a kiss that started soft and sweet but quickly deepened into something more passionate. Sarah's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, and she pressed closer, wanting more of him, all of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with absolute sincerity. "I've loved you since that first day on the trail. I just needed time to believe it was real." "I love you too," Sarah whispered back, tears of joy stinging her eyes. "I've never felt like this before, never knew I could feel like this." "Marry me," Zach said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I know it's fast by conventional standards, but nothing about us has been conventional from the start. Marry me, Sarah. Let me spend my life protecting you, providing for you, loving you." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Zach kissed her again, and this time there was joy mixed with the passion, a celebration of the future they were choosing together. When they finally made their way back to the house hand in hand, Sarah felt as though she was floating, lighter than air. They were married 3 weeks later in White Oaks' small church, with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple but beautiful dress of cream-colored silk that Lucy had helped her sew. Zach wore new clothes purchased for the occasion, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in formal attire. But when he saw Sarah walking toward him down the aisle, his face lit up with such open adoration that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Marshall Garrett stood as one of Zach's witnesses, along with Miguel Ortiz. Lucy and Martha Henderson stood with Sarah. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Zach's kiss was both proper and promising, hinting at the passion that would follow when they were finally alone. The reception was held at the hotel's dining room, with food and drinks provided by seemingly half the merchants in town. Sarah was touched by how welcoming the community had been, how quickly she had been accepted despite being an outsider. Of course, being married to Zach probably helped. He was respected, even if he kept mostly to himself, and his reputation for fairness and capability had preceded him. The only shadow on the day came when Vincent Drake made an appearance at the reception. He was a tall, well-dressed man in his 40s with cold blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. He approached Sarah and Zach during a lull in the festivities, his movements calculated to appear casual. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, offering a slight bow. "Or should I say Mrs. Cooper now? Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you, Mr. Drake," Sarah replied coolly. Drake's attention shifted to Zach, and something assessing entered his gaze. "Cooper, I've heard a lot about you. Mountain man, war veteran, someone who knows how to handle himself. Impressive." "What do you want, Drake?" Zach's tone was flat, devoid of social niceties. "Just to congratulate the happy couple," Drake said smoothly, "and to reiterate my interest in purchasing the Graham Ranch property, should you ever decide to sell. I'm prepared to offer quite a generous sum." "The property isn't for sale," Sarah said firmly. "It was my aunt's legacy, and I intend to honor her memory by keeping it in the family." Drake's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Admirable sentiment. But ranching is difficult work, especially for someone new to the territory. Should you change your mind, my offer stands. He nodded to them both and walked away, leaving a chill in his wake. "I don't trust him," Zach said quietly, watching Drake leave. "Neither do I," Sarah agreed, "but we won't let him ruin today. This is our day, Zach. Our beginning." Zach's expression softened, and he took her hand, raising it to his lips. "You're right. Nothing is going to ruin today." They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in a room overlooking the main street of White Oaks. It was the first time they had been truly alone, with no need for propriety or restraint, and the intensity of their passion surprised them both. Zach was gentle despite his strength, taking time to worship every inch of Sarah's body, making her feel cherished and desired in equal measure. She discovered a tenderness in him that complemented his power, a capacity for deep emotion that he had kept carefully guarded until now. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow hotel bed, Sarah traced the scars on Zach's chest and shoulders, evidence of his hard life and the battles he had fought. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," Sarah replied honestly. "You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner," Zach said. "I wasted 3 years alone on that mountain when I could have been searching for you." "You found me when we both needed it," Sarah said. "That's what matters." They returned to the ranch the next day to begin their life together. Zach moved his belongings from the barn into the main house, and for the first time, Sarah's aunt's bedroom became truly theirs. Zach had worried about that, about living in another man's space, but Sarah had redecorated enough that it felt new and personal to them both. Their life fell into a rhythm that was both work and joy. The ranch demanded constant attention, but with their hired hands and Zach's knowledge, it began to thrive. The cattle fattened on good grass, the chickens produced eggs reliably, and the fields yielded respectable crops. Money was tight, as it always was for small ranches, but they managed, and Sarah had never felt richer. Zach still made occasional trips up to his mountain cabin, bringing down furs from traps he maintained and checking on the property. But he never stayed away long, always returning to the ranch and to Sarah with visible relief and joy. Their first real test came about 3 months after the wedding. Sarah was in town with Lucy, purchasing supplies, when 3 men approached them on the street. They were rough-looking characters, the kind of drifters and troublemakers that mining towns attracted. "You Sarah Cooper?" the leader asked, blocking their path. "I am," Sarah replied, her hand instinctively moving toward the small pistol she now carried in her bag, remembering Zach's lessons about always being prepared. "Mr. Drake wants to talk to you about selling your ranch. He sent us to bring you to his office." "I'm not interested in talking to Mr. Drake," Sarah said firmly, "and I'm certainly not going anywhere with you. Now, please step aside." The man's expression hardened. "That wasn't a request, lady." Before Sarah could react, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. She said, "No, I suggest you listen." Zach had emerged from the general store, and the change in him was instant and dramatic. This was the man Sarah had seen fight 3 outlaws on the trail, all coiled power and controlled violence. The 3 men recognized the danger immediately, hands dropping toward their guns. "Don't," Zach said quietly, and something in his voice froze them in place. "You pull those guns, you won't walk away. I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully." "Take it." Marshal Garrett appeared from his office, drawn by the commotion. "Problem here?" "These men were just leaving," Zach said, his eyes never leaving the three troublemakers. Weren't you? The leader assessed the situation. Zach, the marshal, and growing crowd of townspeople watching with hostile expressions. Whatever Drake was paying them, it wasn't worth dying over. We're leaving, he muttered, but Drake's not going to be happy. Drake can come talk to me directly if he has concerns, Zach replied. Tell him that. The three men backed away slowly, then turned and walked quickly toward their horses. Zach didn't relax until they had ridden out of town, and even then, Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. You all right? He asked, turning to her immediately, his hands running over her arms as if checking for injury. I'm fine, Sarah assured him, though her heart was still racing. They didn't touch me. Garrett joined them, his expression grim. Drake's getting bold if he's sending men to intimidate you in broad daylight. I'll have words with him about this. I'll come with you, Zach said. Zach? No, Sarah protested. Let the marshal handle it legally. She's right, Garrett said. I appreciate the offer, but this needs to be done official-like. You getting involved might make things worse. Drake would love an excuse to claim you assaulted him or his men. Zach clearly didn't like it, but he nodded reluctantly. Fine. But if his men approach my wife again, all bets are off. Understood, Garrett said, and fair enough. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Sarah could feel the tension still radiating from Zach. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Talk to me, she said softly. I should have been with you, Zach said, his voice tight with self-recrimination. I should never have let you go into town without me. Zach, you can't be with me every second of every day. I'm not helpless. You taught me to shoot, to be aware of my surroundings. I would have handled it. I know you would have, Zach said, but I don't like you having to. When I saw those men cornering you, when I thought about what might have happened if I hadn't been there. He trailed off, his jaw clenching. Sarah turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands. But you were there. You're always there when I need you. That's who you are, Zach. My protector, my partner, my love. I trust you completely. Zach pulled her close, holding her against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat gradually slowing from its agitated pace. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes, he admitted. Before you, I had nothing to lose. Now, I have everything to lose, and the thought of anything happening to you. Nothing is going to happen to me, Sarah said firmly. We're going to be fine. Drake is a bully and a coward, and bullies back down when they're challenged. You challenged him today, and he'll think twice before trying anything else. She was right, as it turned out. Marshal Garrett visited Drake and made it clear that any further harassment would result in legal action. Drake, whatever his faults, was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. The intimidation stopped, though Sarah occasionally felt his cold eyes on her when their paths crossed in town. Life on the ranch continued, and as winter approached, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Zach one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. She needn't have worried. His expression went from surprise to joy to something almost like awe in the space of a few heartbeats. A baby, he said, his voice hushed with wonder. We're going to have a baby. You're happy? Sarah asked, though she could see the answer clearly in his eyes. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Zach said, pulling her gently into his arms, his hands splayed protectively over her still flat stomach. I never thought I'd have this, a wife I love, a home, and now a child. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Zach became even more protective, if that was possible, constantly ensuring Sarah didn't overwork herself or take unnecessary risks. It was endearing, even if occasionally frustrating when his concern tipped into overprotectiveness. Their son was born in early June of 1879, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The doctor from town had arrived just in time, along with Lucy and Martha Henderson. Zach paced outside the bedroom door, prevented from entering by the women who insisted this was no place for a husband. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and loud, he burst through the door despite the protests, needing to see for himself that Sarah was all right. She lay exhausted but glowing in the bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Her face lit up when she saw him. Come meet your son, she said softly. Zach approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red-faced baby in Sarah's arms. The infant had a surprising amount of dark hair and was making small snuffling noises. When Zach carefully touched one tiny hand, the baby's fingers curled around his calloused finger with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Zach said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're both perfect." They named him Zachary Graham Cooper, though they called him Graham to distinguish him from his father. Graham was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly established himself as the center of their world. Zach took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, changing diapers, walking the floor with Graham when he fussed, and generally proving that his fierce exterior hid a capacity for infinite gentleness when it came to his family. The ranch continued to prosper. By Graham's first birthday, they had expanded their herd and hired 2 more hands. The property had become one of the more successful small ranches in the area, and Sarah took pride in knowing she had honored her aunt's legacy while building something of her own. Zach never lost his protective nature or his quiet intensity, but fatherhood had added new dimensions to him. Sarah loved watching him with Graham, seeing the patience and tenderness he showed their son. He taught the boy everything with the same care he had once shown Sarah, passing on skills and knowledge with infinite patience. When Graham was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult, and there were moments when Zach's worry was palpable. But Sarah was strong, toughened by years of ranch work and mountain living, and she came through safely. Their daughter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, smaller than Graham had been, but with the same determined spirit. They named her Elizabeth Martha Cooper, after Sarah's mother and her aunt. Beth, as they called her, had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. She was sweet-natured but stubborn when she wanted something, a combination that made both her parents laugh. The years passed in a blur of work and joy, challenges and triumphs. Graham grew into a strong, capable boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere. Beth became her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew, while also demanding that her father teach her to ride and shoot just as he had Graham. The ranch became their whole world, a place where they had built something lasting from nothing, where love had taken root and flourished. Zach's mountain cabin remained, occasionally visited but no longer home. Home was here, with Sarah and their children, in the house they had made together. They faced challenges over the years, droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and failed crops, the constant struggle that was ranching in the harsh New Mexico territory. But they faced everything together, their partnership and love remaining the bedrock foundation of their lives. Vincent Drake eventually moved on to other ventures, his mining operations playing out or being sold to larger corporations. Other threats came and went, but Zach's reputation as a man not to be trifled with protected his family. Everyone in White Oaks and the surrounding territory knew that Zachary Cooper would move heaven and earth to protect what was his. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Zach stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Graham, now 11, was helping Miguel with the horses. Beth, 7 years old, was reading on the porch swing, her small face serious with concentration. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked, leaning against Zach's solid warmth. "The solitude, the quiet of your mountain cabin?" Zach wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "No," he said simply. "I thought I wanted solitude, but I was just hiding from life. You gave me something to live for, Sarah. You, Graham, Beth, this ranch. This is everything I never knew I needed." "I remember the first moment I saw you," Sarah said, smiling at the memory. "Standing on that ridge with your rifle, looking like some kind of legend come to life. I was terrified and in awe at the same time." "I remember seeing you standing up to those outlaws," Zach replied. "So brave even though you were scared. I knew right then you were special, that you were going to change my life." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I didn't expect to fall in love quite so fast. When you told me to stay in the cabin that day, when you went to deal with those supply thieves, do you remember?" Zach chuckled. "You listened too. I was impressed. Most people argue with me when I give orders." "I saw you fight 3 men alone on that first day," Sarah said. "I learned quickly that when Zachary Cooper gives an order, it's worth following. I never disobeyed after that, at least not about matters of safety." "Well, you disobeyed plenty about other things," Zach teased. Like when I said the barn roof was too dangerous for you to help repair, or when I wanted to hire more hands and you insisted we could manage with what we had. Sarah laughed, the sound bright and happy. I only disobey about the things that matter. Your overprotective streak needed some management. Still does, Zach admitted, but you handle me well. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children, watching the sunset over the land they had built their life on. The ranch that Sarah's aunt had started, that Sarah had claimed, and that they had turned into something thriving and beautiful. Papa, Beth called from the swing. Mama, come listen to the story I'm reading. Coming, sweetheart, Sarah called back, but before they moved, Zach caught her hand and pulled her around to face him. Thank you, he said seriously. For that day on the trail when you looked at me and saw someone worth trusting instead of someone to fear. For taking a chance on a rough mountain man with more scars than social graces. For building this life with me. Thank you for saving me, Sarah replied, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. Not just from those outlaws, but from a life that would have been half empty without you in it. You're my mountain, Zach. My strength, my shelter, my home. Zach kissed her again, deeper this time, a promise and a reminder of all they had built together and all they still had to look forward to. When they broke apart, both were smiling. Papa! Mama! Beth called again, more insistently this time, and they laughed together, walking hand in hand to join their daughter on the porch swing. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the Cooper family sat together, Graham having joined them after finishing his chores. They listened to Beth read, her young voice confident and clear, stumbling only occasionally over difficult words. Zach corrected her gently when needed, while Sarah stroked her daughter's hair with absent affection. This was everything, Sarah thought, looking at her family gathered close on a cool evening, the ranch spreading out around them in the twilight. This was the life she had dreamed of, but never quite believed possible. And it had all started with a moment of terror on a dusty trail when a mountain man with storm-gray eyes had stood between her and danger, had fought 3 men alone to protect strangers, and had somehow, miraculously, become the center of her entire world. The mountain man who had ordered her to stay in the cabin during those early dangerous days, who she had obeyed without question because she had seen what he was capable of, had become her husband, her partner, the father of her children, and the great love of her life. The trust she had placed in him that first day had been rewarded 1,000 times over, every single day since. As Beth finished her story and Graham began telling them about a clever thing one of the horses had done that day, as Zach's arm settled warm and secure around Sarah's shoulders, she knew with absolute certainty that she would never regret the choice she had made. The choice to trust, to stay, to build a life in this wild, beautiful place with this strong, gentle man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. The story that had begun with violence and fear had transformed into one of love and family, of hard work and honest living, of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had created something beautiful from that unexpected meeting. And as the New Mexico stars blazed overhead and the wind whispered through the pines, the Cooper family sat together in perfect contentment, knowing they had everything they needed right here, in this moment, on this ranch, in the life they had built together. Years later, when Graham and Beth had grown and started families of their own, when the ranch had passed into their capable hands, Sarah and Zach would still sit on that porch together in the evenings, watching the sunset over the mountains. They would hold hands and remember that first day on the trail, that first fight, that first moment of trust that had led to everything else. And Zach would sometimes shake his head in wonder and say, I can't believe you got in that stagecoach all those years ago. Can't believe our paths crossed on that particular day on that particular trail. And Sarah would squeeze his hand and reply, I can. It was fate, Zach. We were always meant to find each other, to build this life together. Everything that came before was just the journey that led us to that moment. And Zach, this man who had lived through war and wilderness, who had faced down outlaws and built a life from nothing, would nod and pull his wife close and thank whatever powers governed the universe for that dusty trail, that attempted robbery, and the courage of a woman from Philadelphia who had trusted a mountain man with her life and her heart. Their love story, born in the wild violence of the Old West, had mellowed into something gentler, but no less passionate, no less true. They had proven that love could flourish in harsh places, that trust could grow into something unbreakable, and that two people who seemed to come from different worlds could create a new world together, one built on respect, partnership, and a devotion that had only deepened with every passing year. And when they were very old, sitting on that same porch with grandchildren playing in the yard that had once been nothing but wild land, they would tell the story of how they met, about the outlaws and the fight, about the mountain cabin and the first days of knowing each other, about the orders given and obeyed, about trust earned and love found. And their grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, thrilled by the adventure and the romance of it all, inspired by the proof that true love not only existed, but could last a lifetime. The ranch would continue, generation after generation, each adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that Sarah and Zachary had built. The land would prosper, the family would grow, and the legend of how it all started, with a mountain man who fought 3 men alone and a brave woman who trusted him completely, would be passed down as a treasured piece of family history. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this perfect evening with their children young, and their love still new enough to feel like a miracle, Sarah and Zach simply sat together in the gathering darkness, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place, to each other, to this life that they had chosen and built together in the beautiful, unforgiving wilderness of New Mexico in 1879. The end.